Hello, my writer friend. How you doing? This is Tom Leveen. I wanted to do a quick, sort of down and dirty look at a topic I'm going to be teaching on here in the Phoenix area in just about a week, and that topic is on atmosphere. What is atmosphere? What isn't atmosphere? And how can we use it or manipulate it in our writing? So let's just go ahead and jump right in. Atmosphere to me is very closely connected with the idea of voice, and I use voice with kind of a capital V to underscore its importance and what it is versus what it isn't. Voice is not dialogue. Voice, to me, my own personal opinion, is everything you bring to the table. It's all of your good experiences, all of your bad experiences, everything that makes you who you are is your voice. And voice can be manipulated. It's largely, I think, a matter of, I wasn't going to say talent. It's not talent. Voice is largely a matter of instinct or impulse. Whatever kind of first comes out of you tends to be your voice. But once you've done that, once you've made a first draft, whether that's a short story, novel, or some other work, whatever's on the page there is your voice. But again, that can be manipulated. So can atmosphere. Let's take a setting like the Old West, the American Old West. When we say that, that is literally just a setting. It's not a genre. Now, in that setting, you can create a Western, of course. You could create a category romance. You could create a science fiction novel. You could create a thriller or a mystery, horror, supernatural thriller. Anything you can think of, any other genre can basically be slotted into the American Old West. And what that genre, what those genre expectations are going to impact your voice and your atmosphere, in my opinion. So, for example, we're going to set a horror story in the Old West. Well then, we want to choose words and organize them in such a way that we get a horror or supernatural sense of the place, right? And those words are probably going to differ at least a little bit, if not dramatically, than if we were writing a category romance set in the same time and place. Likewise, if we were doing something more science fiction, like cowboys versus aliens, things like that, or more of a thriller or anything like that, our word choices are going to impact the atmosphere. I've never been to the Old West. I live in Arizona, and I've been to, horse ranches and things like that. We've got Old Tucson, and we've got Tombstone, which is still a town, where the OK Corral shootout took place. These are real places that you can visit, and you can get a sense of time and place by visiting them. But the reality is, it's 2018. I don't know exactly what it was like to live in the Old West, over 100 years ago. But I know what horse poop smells like. Maybe you do too. It depends on where you're from or what kind of adventures and vacations you've had, I suppose. But let's talk about horse poop. Let's just talk about horse shit right now for a second. If you're writing a category romance set in the American Old West, maybe you don't want to talk about the smell of horse shit. You can. It's certainly reasonable. It was there. So maybe that is something you want to include. But probably to set the atmosphere you want, maybe you want to focus on the sweet smell of hay or honeysuckle or creosote after a desert storm, something like that, which will set your atmosphere just a little bit more in the romantic vein. If, on the other hand, you're writing something in the horror genre, maybe you do want to talk about the smell of horse shit. Maybe that's the kind of thing that you want to give your reader up front so that they know, okay, this isn't going to be a pleasant experience, or this isn't going to be a pleasant setting, a pleasant scenario, a pleasant atmosphere. Voice is when you sit down to write a horror story and you're describing blood, and the first word that comes out of you is red. Okay, that's fine. There's nothing wrong with calling blood red because, golly, it is, so that's fine. That's probably your voice. If that's the first thing that came to mind, you probably want to trust it, at least initially. In revision, on the other hand, you need to be asking yourself those critical questions over and over again. Is red the right word? Should it be crimson? Is it magenta? Is it chunky? Is it fluid? Is there some other thing that we need to describe it? Do we need to describe the blood at all? What is the best phrasing? What is the best word, the best punctuation, the best white space on the page to get across the atmosphere we want to have our readers experience? Another example, if we are writing, let's say, a chase sequence, okay, and you have a big whopping block of text of huge paragraphs, that's fine. If that's your voice, that's cool. There are plenty of examples of writers who do that. In general, you might want to consider breaking up a big paragraph like that into smaller chunks, maybe 2 paragraphs, maybe 3, maybe 10. It just depends. But that's the kind of thing that you want to do for revision. Hope that makes sense. So, atmosphere is about, in my opinion, particularly the revision process. Fine-tuning those words and sentences and phrases, making sure you have chosen the right word and the right descriptive paragraphs, the right things that you want to include that are going to give your reader a real sense of time and place. So I think atmosphere is the thing that really sets us and roots us in the genre more than it does the time and the place. Again, we can set something in the Old West, but that doesn't mean it's a Western genre novel. There are any number of genres you could set in the Old West or in the future. Just because we're set in the future doesn't mean it's science fiction. So if that's something that you have been sort of locked into, try to break out of that. Your setting is not your atmosphere. Atmosphere, in my opinion, is related to genre. Atmosphere is the sense of a place, the taste, the texture, the smells, the things that are descriptive to us as the reader that really root us into that genre and what the mood that we want to have the reader walk away with. There are certainly, certain genres have very specific moods or atmosphere to them. We're not going to confuse a Stephen King novel with a category romance, for the most part. There may be a couple exceptions, but generally speaking, we can tell from the first few pages of Stephen King versus a Regency romance which of those two things we're going to get. Are we getting something horror? Are we getting something romance? Not to say romantic, but romance. Slightly different thing. So, let's say you're writing science fiction. Is this something where we want lots of cold, hard, rigid angles? Is it, because it's very cold in space, right? Do we want to bring that to the fore? Or, I just read a book not too long ago for my book club that was set, very much deep space, long-term space travel, aliens, the whole nine, and yet was a very warm and sort of embracing atmosphere, if you will. It didn't feel like science fiction at all, because while it technically is going to be shelved perhaps in science fiction, the atmosphere of the novel wasn't cold, hard, edged, electronic, things like that. It wasn't Battlestar Galactica. It wasn't even Star Wars. It was very much its own thing. And the author, I think, is to be commended for doing that because she was paying attention to the story she wanted to tell, and it just so happened to be set on a spaceship, if that makes sense. So what is atmosphere? Yeah, atmosphere, I think, is the mood of the piece. It sinks into the reader. It's something that I think needs to be up front in the first chapter or the first few pages of a book, because you only get those first few pages. Remember that. I critique first pages all the time because I generally don't need to read your whole novel. I can tell you what your problems are going to be in the first 500 words, and any agent or editor would be able to do the same thing. As a matter of fact, that's what most agents do. They're not going to read past the first page if that first page didn't grab them. So we want to establish atmosphere as early as possible and as quickly as possible. However, personal opinion, I would argue that establishing the voice of the characters is even more important than that. But again, it depends on the genre, it depends on your personal voice, your personal style, and what it is you want to convey. But we can't have a great story without great characters, for sure. But those great characters should be given a great atmosphere in which to play and work in. I think it's important that we become students of the English language. I'm going to change that and say the American language, because American words and idioms are very different than English words and idioms, or British words and idioms versus Canadian versus Australian or other English-speaking countries like that. So American English. We want to be very familiar and intimate, I would say, with the various shadings of meaning when it comes to American words and phrases. Again, is red the right word or is crimson the right word? Those are very different, even if slight, they are very different things and bring a different sense and different emotion to the word. But the other part about that is, does that word need to be there at all? I don't know, depends. What can help your atmosphere? I would argue listening to music can help you establish atmosphere, can kind of get your blood flowing and make you think of images and textures, smells, colors, things like that you might want to use to establish atmosphere. Some of you have probably heard me talk or have read about emotional memory. That's another crucial part about atmosphere. Again, I've never been to the Old West. None of us ever have been to the Old West, presumably. If you are, congratulations for making it this far. So I've never been to the Old West, so I'm probably not going to get all of those details right, but number one, I can research it, I can study it. Number two, more importantly, I can bring to my description and to my characters things that I myself have experienced. So if I'm going to write a horror story set in the Old West, I may not be talking about the technical details of the six-shooter, for example, because I don't know those details, but I can very much talk about what it feels like to be at the end of a gun. I've never had a gun pointed at me, but I've been in enough situations of pure terror that I can talk about that and endow those feelings into the scene. That's what emotional memory is. Even though you may not have experienced the things that your characters are experiencing, you can recall things where you felt something that they are feeling, and you again endow that into the scene, and that can help define atmosphere. Think about places that you hated to go when you were a kid. What were the things that you hated about? Let's say you hated going to the doctor's office. Fair enough. What was it specifically? Really dig down, drill down, and find those specific descriptions, the textures, the smells, the tastes, everything. What was it about the doctor's office that you hated, or the dentist's office, or something like that? And then endow that into a scene about the haunted house, or about your, the ex-wife's house, or whatever, if that's what the scene calls for. On the flip side, if you're writing, let's say you're writing a romance and we want your hero to be blown away the first time that he or she enters into this person's house or place of business or something. Well, what is the feeling you want that character to have? And then you go back and use your emotional memory to think of, oh yeah, I remember a time I felt like that, and you endow that into the scene. I've never been, to the White House. I've never been to a super luxurious hotel. So I'm not probably going to write about that. Instead, I'm going to write about, the first time I went to a new friend's house and his dad had a lot of money or something, and the size of their house compared to the size of mine, and just being like, whoa, this is intense. In which case, it's that emotional part, it's that part that's going to speak to human experience that's going to set up the atmosphere or to set up the mood. Does that make sense? I hope it does. Anyway, I've probably talked enough. Thank you for watching. I hope you found something useful in all this. I hope I do a good job teaching this next weekend. If you enjoyed the video, feel free to share it about a little bit. That's okay with me. Encourage your friends, your writer friends, to go ahead and sign up for the email list. I would super appreciate that. And if you have any questions or anything else you want to comment on, go ahead and head over to my Facebook author page, which is facebook.com/author Tom Leveen, all one word. Leave a comment or a question. I'd be happy to engage with you there. Thank you so much for being on the list. I really appreciate that, and be looking for a new book on living the life of a writer, published or unpublished, doesn't matter, but living the life of a writer. I'm going to be working on that here very soon, and man, we are not going to bullshit with this one. It's going to be all hard truths, and I think you will enjoy that. So thank you very much for tuning in, and I think that's it. Thanks. Take care.